What do you think? Should Canada Post be privatized? You can always send me a text message with your thoughts on what we're discussing, 514-790-0800. We're going to continue the show by looking at that question. The Montreal Economic Institute is arguing that Canada Post would benefit substantially from privatization, and they look at other countries around the world to prove their case. Of course, this discussion is happening as Canada Post workers, the union there, has just voted to reject the last contract offer from the Crown Corporation. We're talking about 55,000 postal service workers here. This is a big issue. We head over to Vincent Geloso, a senior economist at the Montreal Economic Institute, and just co-authored a report on privatizing Canada Post. Vincent, welcome back to the program.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So, listen, give us your take. Let's just start off with that. Why do you believe we'd be better off with a privatized Canada Post?
The reason is very simple. So, mail volume in Canada has declined. Canada Post is having a hard time not getting into really, really deep losses. And in the past, the way it dealt with financial losses, since it had a monopoly over letter mail, it just raised the stamp prices. So if you look at the prices of stamp, they've increased twice faster than inflation since the 1980s. That was before. Now with the internet and emails, consumers can just work around Canada Post. So now Canada Post goes to taxpayers instead of just gouging consumers, and they're asking for taxpayer money to compensate for these losses. This is not sustainable. The pitch for looking at Germany is the Germans did a two-step set of reform. They opened up the market to competition, so that would mean letter mail could be sent by any company inside Canada, and they privatized Canada Post. So they started selling, their equivalent of Canada Post. Mm-hmm. They were selling Deutsche Post, and they did it gradually, and the result was, if you look at the prices of stamps, they fell rapidly after the reform. And today, they're still 10% below what they were in 1989.
Okay, I want to highlight that part. I really want to highlight what you just said. Okay, and I want to pick up on two things you said. So, since the 80s, the cost of sending a letter in this country has gone up at twice the rate of inflation. And yes. And you're telling me in Germany, where they went to privatization, in fact, keeping into account inflation, the cost of sending a letter is less than it was in the 80s.
Yes. So if you start, we'll use 1989. 1989 is the same year as Germany started its reform. The cost of sending a letter, inflation adjusted in Canada, is 50% higher. Okay? So it's a bit higher if you started to look from 1981 when we converted Canada Post from a government department to a crown corporation, but it's the same trend over time. In Germany, since 1989, the price is 10% lower adjusting for inflation than it was in 1989. So the prices actually fell a lot in the first few years, and sometimes there's like a small spike in 1 year when they, after 5 or 6 or 7 years of not touching the price of stamp, they actually increase it a little and jumps up, and then it reverts back. Mm-hmm. So they keep prices well below. The price changes are well below inflation, and Germans have been able to pay insanely lower prices as a result. So if you look at the direction, the German example is telling you mm-hmm. it's the right direction to go in.
So let me just ask you, because there's a couple things that stick out in my head. No two countries are the same, right? And geographically, Canada and Germany are different. And I've heard people argue, hey, one of the things that's great about Canada.
I'm sorry, this is a bullshit argument.
Whoa, hey, Vince,
I'm sorry. It's not against you. It gets to me because
I understand. Just take a deep breath here and let's rein in the language because it's still a family show. Okay,
sorry about that.
So I understand it may be a lousy argument, and you can tell us why.
So the reason why is this is an argument that the Canadian Union of Postal Workers likes to kick out, and because it strikes with our instinct as Canadians. Canada's a huge place, but this assumes that everyone in Canada is spread equally across the territory, rather than having pockets of people spread out along the U.S. border. So the reality is Canada's market is not actually that much different than Germany. In fact, the ways in which Canada and Germany differ is actually favorable to Canada to having lower prices. Because you got to picture that Germany is a very dense country. One of the big problem post companies have in Germany, and it's like a historical problem, is you get cars stuck in traffic very often. That they're stuck inside like very high density areas. So the pace at which they can deliver mail is much slower, just because of this natural problem of density inside Germany. In Canada, it's far easier to send mail. So if anything, so this is another reply that you'll get from the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, and it gets to me because I've been working on this for a decade now, is they'll say, look, but prices are higher level-wise in Germany. And they'll say, look, it's higher. Well, yes, but that would mean that if you look at the direction, Canada could be going in the right direction, so prices could fall, and they could be insanely lower than in Germany. Because the structure of Canada's geography actually is favorable to really high-speed delivery, low costs for trucks, high volumes where you can use larger trucks, and people are concentrated along the border. It's actually to Canada's advantage, the geography is.
Let me just ask you on this front, because you got 55,000 postal workers here. And, part of me thinks about, okay, I look at some of the other models that are out there to deliver packages, like, the companies that Amazon uses, let's say, like the Intelcoms of the world, right? I hear they don't pay very well, right? It's like sometimes, and I don't know if it's the details of every company, but some companies, they pay based on package, and they're only paying a few dollars. And these people, work very long and hard hours. So I don't know if we look to Germany there on that front, like what happened to wages? Because, I kind of, don't want to sort of say, hey, let's just take the gig economy model and put it for every single job, including like Canada Post jobs. So what about that front? Because, people making a decent living, I think that should be a goal as well.
Yes, but let's put a caveat on that one thing. A decent living should not be made at somebody else's expense when you have to go see the taxpayer who has no say in the matter, and then you are essentially getting it, not because you're providing a high-quality service, but because you're really good at lobbying politicians. I think this is a distinction that we should very importantly strike. And you should not have higher wages as a result of having a monopoly over a large share of the market. I think everyone would say, oh, if that company has high wages for its worker, but it has a monopoly, I think most people would be somewhat offended by these high wages. Now, that being said, if you think as an economist, what causes high wages is high productivity. And so what we would want to keep the wages high inside Canada Post is to boost the productivity at Canada Post, which is in our proposal at the NEI is we say, well, let's align incentives. When we do the privatization, let's sell the shares. Let's actually not sell the shares. Let's give a large block of the shares to the employees of Canada Post. And in the virtue of doing this is so we would tend to think that because they have above market wages for their services, they'd be the losers from privatization. We're saying let's compensate them, and let's also have this extra benefit from giving them shares, which it aligns their incentives with controlling costs inside the company. It also gives them abilities and incentives to exploit information. So right now, a local employee who knows something that could actually reduce costs has no incentive to exploit that. Because inside the Canada Post, it's a pretty big bureaucracy, has a hard time doing these, but he has no incentive to do it because if he makes it better, what is he withdrawing out of reducing costs?
There's no payoff. There's no payoff.
It's kind of privatization.
Vincent,
he gets the payoff.
Vincent, listen, I have to wrap up here, but I'll ask you one brief, quick question because it's been pretty clear. You want to be honest about how you feel, okay? So my last question to you is, do you think the government has the courage to do something drastic, the right decision, a big, bold move here?
I like your question, but I there's a part of it that I don't like because it's kind of saying that my proposal is like a proposal that government should follow, but just thinking about the privatization, I think it's unavoidable that something will have to be done. So it's not whether or not we should do it. It's how's the best way to do it?
Mm-hmm.
I think what we're advancing in that policy study is the best way to make sure that the privatization succeeds, that it leads to lower prices for consumers, and that members inside Canada Post are not penalized and that the process doesn't fail, essentially. This is why we say, let's open up the market, let's give shares to the employees. Yes, the government will lose some revenues from privatization, so it won't be able to get like the 40%, say, of shares that it gives to the employees, but it actually makes the process easier, smoother, and it doesn't leave out losers, people who are basically hurt
Vincent,
by the reform.
I got
how is what matters.
I got to leave it there. Really great discussion. Thanks so much.
It was a pleasure.
That's Vincent Geloso, senior economist at the Montreal Economic Institute.